Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It is Thursday, April 21st. Derek Van Riper here with Eno Saris. On this episode, we will discuss the problem of finding starting pitching in season, already an issue for me in more than a couple of leagues, and it looks like the waiver wire is already pretty thin. So, digging a little deeper, looking for some help on that front. Got an email sent to Eno about a new early sample hitting metrics. So we'll dig into that and talk about what that might mean and how that might steer us to a few players to either trade for or possibly even pick up in a few cases. There's a handful of names on there that might actually be available in some more shallow formats. Had a good follow-up email to Max Velocity that we talked about on the last episode with Jacob deGrom. So we'll try to get to that today as well. And if there's time, we'll go through a pickup process example because there was a request for us to kind of walk through step by step how we would look at a situation if we were thinking about picking up two different hitters. How would we go about doing that? So let's begin, with finding pitching in season, a common problem, not just a Derek problem. This is not just me having therapy on the podcast. There is a league where I am doing great with my bats. I am among the league leaders in hitting points, and I am currently dead last in pitching points. And my concern about that is that I'm dead last in strikeouts, not that I'm dead last in ERA and second to last in whip, because I think the pitchers I have are not as bad ratio wise as they've been through their first two turns in the rotation. That's an easy thing to talk myself out of. But I do think if you're sitting in the position I am, where you are underperforming in strikeouts through 2 weeks, you need to make adjustments now. And that led me to the waiver wire. I looked at the wires. It's a 15-team league in this case. I said, this is not good. There's not a lot of pitching help out here. So I need to start formulating a plan to get more volume and to help close down that gap as quickly as possible. Because the longer we go where I'm lagging, the harder it's going to be to make up that ground later on.
Yeah, it's true. And I'm last in strikeouts in my main, so I better get going on it. I was just furiously checking my standings. Yeah, I mean, I think that there are things you could do. Like, for example, if you've been using a spot on your bench for saves prospecting, maybe now that's got to switch over to a starting pitcher. That's a sort of NFC thing where you have that limited small bench, but it's an important thing to think about is like your allocation of resources on that bench. Maybe it's time, if you have your hitting's doing fine, then maybe it's time to have one less hitter on your bench. I, for example, have now cobbled together a Stomont, Bednar, Soto three-headed monster and monsters in quotation marks for my bullpen. So maybe it's time, as much as I like John Duran, to drop him for the next two-start pitcher. And then it's time probably to start thinking about two-start pitching a lot. That's why the Razzball tool is very useful. You can kind of look at all of your options on the waiver wire to pick up something that's going to be heavy in Ks.
Yeah, I think the two good points that you made there along the way, do not at this point feel compelled to hold that third reliever who's not getting you saves, right? That player, if it hasn't happened in the first 2 weeks and there's no change in terms of injuries or someone else in the pen really underperforming, move on. You can find someone else like that at any time. And yeah, you may have to pay a little more in fab leagues to get those players if they start to pop before a fab run, but you're going to lag in important stats and you're not getting the one stat you need from those players to make them valuable. And I do have at least one too many position players. For an offense that's loaded, I have three guys that I think I've combined used in my lineup one time in about 6 lineup periods. So that to me is a roster structure problem as well. Sorting out which one I drop might be as simple as dropping the injured one because I'm lucky enough to have that already decided for me. But two-start pitchers, I think the fear people have when they look at two-start pitchers is that they're going to hurt their ratios. It is what could go wrong is sort of the mindset people go into it with because they're often looking at pitchers they ordinarily didn't want to even draft in the first place. And I guess I'm curious, how do you push yourself past that? How do you convince yourself it's going to be fine if I go after these two-start pitchers if I have the right matchups? I'm not saying go out there and throw Zach Davies, a very low K rate pitcher against the Dodgers and the Cardinals. That's probably not quite where you want to go in April. But you do need to choose your spots and find maybe it's Reaver San Martin for a 2-start week, although he's got the Rockies for a second one next week, so that's probably
Mhm.
not the sweet spot. But how do you tell yourself that the ratios aren't going to be a total disaster when you go to the back of a rotation and push someone in there for 2 turns?
Well, I think that you just have to think about matchups. Think about how the spread in talent, how much a matchup can mean. Cole Irvin, for example, this week had the Orioles at home and the Rangers at home. So he's not a good pitch. I mean, good. That's mean. He's not a great pitcher. I mean, he's not a strikeout guy. He doesn't have good stuff. He has a lot of pitches that he can command, and in the right situation, he can be good. And in this situation, he's in a cold ballpark with huge foul ground against 2 of the worst offenses. He doesn't get much better than that. In fact, Razball Raider had him 11th this week. I think that you have to think about the spread in offenses right now. The Angels have scored 65 runs. The Orioles have scored 24.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you can target the Diamondbacks with 33, the Tigers with 33, the Royals with 31, Baltimore with 24, then you are good. And and I think the hardest thing is that it's very rare to get, like, for example, the Rangers have actually scored 53 runs. They're middle of the pack offense. You like that Irvin matchup because it's at home, right? In Oakland. But it's very rare to have 2 matchups that you're like, oh, I love both these matchups. And if they are, then you might have to pay a little bit more because everyone's like, oh, I love this guy.
Mm-hmm.
I think the hardest is on the margins when you have one good start and one start where you're like, do I really want that one? But then you're just hoping that between the two, you get average-ish ratios and you get more Ks. I think if one start is amazing and the other start is not, in Colorado, then I'd lean towards taking it.
Yeah, I think Joan Adone is a name that if we're going to see get picked up this week, and there are little things to like in his profile. It's a home start against Miami and then a road start against San Francisco. Just good enough. Probably in 15s and 12s, I could see maybe passing, but I think he's going to be popular in some of the deeper leagues that we play in part because a few of the other 2-star pitchers actually have 2 tough matchups. Mitch Keller's out there again in some leagues. He's at home twice against the Brewers and Padres. That's probably a go if you're in a situation like the
I
one
don't love
you
that
and I are
Brewers
describing.
bid, but yeah. Yeah, the stuff is better. He had a good start, seems to be figuring out a way to pitch past the straightness of his fastball. And it's home. It's home, Pittsburgh.
Dallas Keuchel. I don't think I can. Maybe a contingency home against the
Woo!
Royals, but then also home against the Angels. So is the bad
And then
start?
off of one of the worst starts I've seen in a long time. That would
Yeah.
take a bit of cojones for me. Do you have any other names?
Kyle Freeland at Philly, home against the Reds. Oh, I don't think I want that.
No.
We got Reaver home against the
What
Padres, road against the Rockies. I don't know if I want to
This
do
is
that.
also an argument. I think in my main, I might want to switch the hitter and the Duran spot to starters. And here's why. You can't afford to stream every week. And some of those names that you'll mention will be owned. Like Mitch Keller will be owned, right? So by having 4 or 5 starting pitchers on my bench, I start creating streaming options on my own team.
Right. You're not paying every single time you do it.
Right. So, I think the major decisions will be Duran for me. Like in this, I know nobody cares about my fantasy team, but it's a high level fantasy team with, I think, these are examples that other people might be struggling with. The struggle for me would be Duran, and Ronzi Contreras,
See, yeah.
because how long do I wait? I mean, he seems like he's almost in there, but could he be like this forever? And then, or how long will it be? And then somebody like Seth Beer or Mike Yastrzemski, or like one of these bats that I'm not playing a lot.
I think, looking beyond the streamers, I do think Roansy Contreras is a little more likely to become a starter than Duran. So if you're
Oh, I mean,
choosing
like
based on
way
that,
more likely.
there's just more
Duran is
evidence, right? It's
I'm hoping for a saves.
yeah, and that's possible, but that still reeks of a future committee, even if
Yeah.
he's a part of it.
And how long can I wait for it? And how desperate is it for me if I have 3 that are closing games right now?
Yeah, I don't think you can wait much longer than you already have for that
But
particular role.
and then if you have deeper benches, and so streaming is almost really tough, right? Like because if you have deeper benches, then all those streamers are on people's rosters already. Like Mitch Keller's
Mhm.
already gone, maybe even Kyle Freeland is gone if you're in a deep enough league with deep enough benches. Then you have to start looking at depth charts, right? And you have to start looking for 6 starters. This conversation came up a little bit online because we was talking with Rob Silver and Vlad Sedler about Tony Gonsolin, and I don't think Tony Gonsolin's that good. I think that the stuff numbers aren't great. The velocity's gone down, and then the command is bottom shelf. It's near reliever command. We've talked about this since the beginning. He started. We've seen it fall apart in the postseason. He has a walk rate of 10% for his career, which only one qualified pitcher had last year. That was Lance McCullers. Does he have stuff like Lance McCullers? I don't think so. So, I don't think he will become a qualified starter. I don't think he's the first choice for them in the long term at a starter position. I think he's thrust into the role when Andrew Heaney has to take 2 weeks off, that sort of deal. But Rob Silver had a good point, which is that he didn't think that the Dodgers had a lot of other options, and the schedule is okay going forward, and at least in the short term, he's going to be really good. Maybe, but when I look at the depth charts, as I would for the Dodgers, I see some options I really like, and some that aren't even listed on the Fangraphs depth chart, which is like Bobby Miller, and Mitch White as possibilities if something happens long term to Andrew Heaney or to another starter. And I could think that both of those guys could possibly push Gonsolin out of the rotation, which Gonsolin's projected for an ERA near 5, projected for a strikeout rate under 1 per inning and a walk rate of nearly 1 every 2 innings. That's just not a recipe for success. So a homer and a half per inning. I can't really argue with those projections. So anyway, this is an exercise of one particular depth chart, but the deeper your league is, the more you want to think about, do I want to bet on Tyler Anderson over Tony Gonsolin to keep his spot? Do I want to start to roster Bobby Miller or Mitch White now to get ahead of it? And I wonder if you've got some of your favorite. I know one in Arizona that you've got your eye on. That's kind of a 6 starter. And we talked about Roansy Contreras. I think this guy in Arizona and Roansy Contreras are among the best 6 starters to kind of get on your roster now.
Yeah, Corbin Martin is still I can't quit Corbin Martin. And I think almost what you're trying to do, if we're talking about a 15-team league, you're trying to find the next Tyler Anderson. You're trying to find the next guy who's going to get bumped in when someone gets hurt, who's already stretched out. So when he gets the opportunity, you're also not waiting a week or two for him to be pitching deep enough into the game to get a win.
Exactly.
So
someone who's
it's a
already
tightrope.
pitching longer innings. And do you want that guy to be in the minors like Bobby Miller, or Mitch White, or do you want him to be in the majors pitching 3 innings? Kind of tough to decide that, because the guy who's pitching in the majors 3 innings, maybe might need to stretch out a little bit more, or maybe they like him in his role, or maybe they're trying to keep his innings down. I think that I got some feedback that some people are having a hard time keeping Drew Rasmussen, especially in like a quality start league, and I get it. But sometimes innings are innings. So, if you're not in a quality start league, Rasmussen is he's going to get some wins. He's going to get you 4 innings at a time, 4 or 5 innings at a time. He's going to be useful. That's a question about like, do I want to keep Corbin Martin on my roster, or do I want to instead have somebody like Bobby Miller, who's more of a long shot, but if he does come up, would be likely to be a full-time starter.
Yeah, I think you could look at Grayson Rodriguez probably the same way too in leagues where he's available. And I think both Miller and Rodriguez are going to bring you to the questions about in-start workloads, at least initially, and then how long does it take for them to get those opportunities? I think it's a guessing game that it's really tough to play because that's another person that you can't stream in. It tightens up the bench and it forces you to spend more on the other pitchers that everybody else is going after. So I find this exercise to be very frustrating. To see that Tyler Anderson was already rostered in this league where I need pitching is frustrating because he's the kind of guy that I would have probably overpaid for, given my needs and given the chance that what's ailing Heaney actually hangs on a bit longer than expected, or that one of the other starters goes down with an injury and Heaney comes back, but Anderson stays in as a result of that. Because we've talked about this before with that starting five, is that there's elevated injury risk with guys like Clayton Kershaw and even Walker Buehler having had Tommy John surgery a few
And
years back. And
his ride and velo are down as a little aside. Like he's not the same player stuff wise he was last year.
yeah, that's a definite cause for concern. I mean, the other names that sort of fit into this conversation, you almost have to hunt on the particularly good teams. Bad teams already have pitching problems and don't.
Well, here I've got some names for you. Aaron Ashby in more shallow leagues. I think in deeper, maybe it just depends on the structure of your league. But Christian Javier, I think with Jake Odorizzi's really horrible start against the Angels, Christian Javier could step in to his spot in the rotation. Ross Stripling might be worth a bet. Based on some of the same characteristics that Hyun-Jin Ryu has given that Ryu's out, because he has multiple pitches and command. He's a little bit like a Tyler Anderson, stepping in there. I think the Braves rotation has a spot right now that they haven't really. There's maybe I guess it's one spot. It's the Huascar Ynoa spot because they sent him down. Now they've been using Bryce Elder, but Elder's had some command issues. We're all hoping it's Spencer Strider, I think, but it could be Kyle Muller or Tucker Davidson. So, there's a bit of a bet. And I'm sorry, I can't necessarily help you and tell you exactly who it's going to be. Like if it were my team, I think I would do Spencer Strider. He had 100 innings in last year. He's got the best stuff numbers. He's already doing really well. However, Spencer Strider's been pitching mostly in 1-inning stints. And so maybe you think this is the reliever that gets me to the World Series again, So do you have an opinion on who you think is going to step into his role?
I've been expecting to be Strider because I think the second time he pitched, the pitch count was basically that of a starter working out of the bullpen. So I thought, okay, this is an easy switch to flip. I think compared to Elder, who's more about
that's right. He hasn't been
arsenal.
pitching 1-inning stints. He's been pitching. Yeah, that's right. He's been pitching longer stints.
Yeah, I
think you're right. That last one was 3 2/3.
And it was like 70 plus pitches, if I remember right, too. Well, it wasn't efficient, but
I wish he wasn't
volume.
walking guys like he was, but the stuff is so excellent. Oh, and a note, when you're looking at stuff and location and pitching plus, Stuff Plus does not consider platoon splits, and pitching plus does. So if you see somebody with a really high Stuff Plus and not that great of a pitching plus, sometimes that's because they're a 2-pitch pitcher, or they just have a slider that lefties can maybe hit. So that's a little bit relevant for Strider. That might be why the walk rate is high. Maybe he's just walking all the lefties. But I still would be super excited to see him in the rotation.
What about Ross Stripling? He's kind of one of the original names that, for our purposes, a few
I already
years
said
back,
him, dude.
I didn't hear you say him before. Ryu's hurt, so you got Stripling in this situation. Didn't pitch well last. I mean, had strikeouts last year, 94 Ks and 101 in the third innings, but a 4.80 ERA, 127 WHIP, major home run issue, 23 homers allowed with a deadened ball in the conditions we're dealing with right now. Though, I'm more optimistic than pessimistic about Stripling being pretty useful for us.
Yeah, he's a little bit tougher in leagues where you have to put him in every week, right? I mean, I'd be a little bit worried about throwing him like in New York, or maybe even home against New York, or home against Boston. Some of those matchups are a little bit tough. It's a tough division, but I do think Stripling is worth taking a look at. I don't know. I'm scrolling through here, and once you get to the bad rotations, there's a lot of pitchers you don't want.
Yeah.
I don't think I'd want. Here's a guy. There was a big discussion because I had let me see here. Oh, I guess he's already in the rotation. I think he's bad enough that he could be on your wire. He's performed poorly enough that he could be on your wire. Daniel Lynch is a little bit interesting to me. I just wrote a piece that was extremely critical of the Royals pitching development right now. I wrote that with Alec Lewis. It's up there right now. There's a fastball problem in the Royals rotation, but the only pitcher that I really see maybe emerging from this group of starters, Brad Keller has an interesting cut fastball right now. He has actually the best fastball stuff of any pitcher in that rotation, which is kind of hard to believe because Carlos Hernandez throws 95, but Hernandez's pitches don't have that great shape. So Brad Keller, I think, is an interesting fringy starter. And then Daniel Lynch is the guy that I do think among their sort of, including like Jackson Kowar, among those sort of 7 guys that they've been starting, I think Daniel Lynch has the best upside long term. There's a thread from Kyle Bodie about some of the problems that Lynch has had, which is that his fastball has a little bit of carry, but he's been aiming low and away because that's what the organizational philosophy is. And that's a bad place to aim your fastball with carry, because if you aim low and away, it comes up to the heart of the zone. And if you look at the heat maps for where Daniel Lynch is throwing his fastball, he's throwing it hard of the zone. So I would be pitching a lot of high fastballs with Daniel Lynch. He has a really good slider. And if he makes any advancements on the shape of his fastball, I think he could break out. So I think Lynch is an interesting guy, especially given home park. I think he'd be a guy I would like to have on my bench in deeper leagues, because in the home park, you have some teams come back, like Detroit comes through at home. I think that's a start you would love to have Daniel Lynch on your bench for. That you would put him into your starting rotation for.
There's one that got away from me. I had him on my roster for saves in some of the drafts that we did probably back more like in early March and prior. But Tyler Wells, I mean, if I was looking back at the O-swing leaderboards from last year, set it to just a minimum of 50 innings, and he had a 39.1% O-swing percentage, which ranked 8th out of 338 pitchers. You can get guys to chase stuff out of the zone. You're doing something right. And I guess I should have been more open-minded to the possibility that someone with his minor league track record and that success, even in a relief role last year, could actually be useful to us as a starter. Instead of saying, oh, he's not getting saves and he's got to deal with the AL East, I'm out. I should have said, this could be some found money in terms of a streaming pitcher if everything carries over. So I think I played that a little bit wrong, and I'm seeing he's rostered in a decent number of 15-team leagues already.
Yeah, I like him a lot. I talked to him when he came to town this week, and he just said all the right things that lined up with what the stuff numbers say, which is his fastball has a lot of carry. He says, I just throw it with conviction, and I've always had a lot of carry on my fastball. It's got good velo. He's a hoss. Like, if you like to see him, he's a large human being. And I think that matters a little bit, because you're talking about, can he have can he have the length? Can he have the stability? Will he start getting 5 innings? He also was a starter he was a starter all the way through the Twins organization. He was only kind of a reliever last year because of some injury issues and the way that they were trying to bring him back. So I do think he's kind of a 3-4 guy. He's in that Rasmussen group right now where it's a little bit rough, but I think he's a little bit closer to Contreras et al. In terms of, and Corbin Martin, in terms of they could ramp up the innings, whereas Rasmussen may be stuck at 80 to 90 pitches all season. So that's something I like about Wells. I'm scrolling through here. Glenn Otto is a name that I like. The Rangers have already used an opener in Matt Bush, and Spencer Howard did not perform that well. I could see Glenn Otto coming up. Glenn Otto has been doing well in the minor leagues. In 2 starts, he has given up 0 runs. His stuff plus last year was pretty decent, and his command is pretty good. So Glenn Otto is a guy that I could see coming up fairly soon, actually, and I like him better than AJ Alexi.
Yeah, he had some pretty interesting numbers in the upper levels of the minor leagues. He was old for the level in 2021 when he started at Double A. 103 Ks and 65 in the third innings against 14 walks. I don't care how old you are. That's still interesting, and they have a clear need. And plus, I'm always willing to roster someone who had an ERA over 7 last year. Glenn Otto had a 9.26 ERA in his 6 starts with the Rangers, but it was a 28-8 K to BB, only 2 homers allowed. It wasn't nearly as bad as it looks when you just look at those ratios. So I think I like that Glenn Otto call, especially if he also was popping in the model with the stuff.
If we revive an old segment, prospect of the week, prospect of the week. Kyle Bradish is a guy that I want to throw out there because he has pretty awesome strikeout rates in the minor leagues, and the command has come and gone. Right now, the command looks like it's doing decent. And as I talk to people around the Orioles yesterday or Tuesday, there seemed to be a sense that maybe Bradish is the first arm up, not the one everyone's waiting for.
Wow.
So if Bradish comes up, I also, as a guy that has not performed well in the past and people might be scared of, and they may not be realizing how the rotation in Baltimore is actually pretty good right now. They are doing some really interesting things with their pitchers, and they have improved Keegan Aiken greatly. Or Keegan Aiken actually did this maybe a little bit on his own during the lockout. He added 11 inches of drop to his curveball.
It's a lot of drop.
11 inches. So he thinks he has a usable curveball now. He also added an inch of drop to his slider. He also added an inch of ride to his four seam. Like basically anything you would want from somebody, Keegan Aiken went and did it on all of his pitches. Interestingly enough, he says it's mostly from long toss. That's his personal philosophy, which I love hearing from people that do things a little bit differently. Long toss is well accepted now, but there were times when people were not into it. Keegan Aiken is only pitching about 2 to 3 innings per appearance right now, but I think he'll take a role eventually. And if you look at, who's starting games, the fact that John Means is hurt, Chris Ellis came up, but is he the long-term choice there? I think that we could see Aiken step into a role here pretty quickly. I'm not sure Spencer Watkins is that great. And in the past, Bruce Zimmerman has not been that awesome. So there is a possibility there for 2, so I like keeping an eye on Bradish and maybe even rostering Aiken as a possibility in the future.
I'll throw Clark Schmidt's name out there as prospect of the week.
Oh my gosh, I can't believe I forgot him.
I don't know if he solves our problem if we're looking for innings in the relative near future. I think there's more Yon Duran in how he's going to be used than Roansy Contreras. At least that's my fear right now. Am I right to look at Schmidt that way, or should I consider him as someone that could sneak into the back of the rotation and work 5 innings at a time in the not so distant future?
I mean, he's got this really weird uses pattern. I mean, the last time he went out, it was 3 1/3 after that Garrett Cole stinker of 1 2/3 or something to begin with. That was on Tuesday. In the spring, I think he was being used closer to a starter's role, and then in our spring stuff leaders, he was like in the top 10 for starters for stuff. So, yes, that number will change if you're asked to go 5 or 6. And can Clark Schmidt can he be asked to go 5 or 6 right now? I think these are all really great questions. And then lastly, what role whose role is he taking? Like what spot in the rotation is he taking? I don't see one that is obvious right now.
You're
So
playing the Tyler Anderson game there, where it's just like
you're waiting for an injury, basically.
someone's going to break for a little while at some point, and he's
Because
possibly the next guy.
because I like Michael King a lot too, but I think Michael King could stay in this weird, neither here nor there kind of interesting role. Even he got like a save the other day, right? He seems to be the guy that they keep in case of extra innings sometimes, or a guy that might jump in after if a starter had a bad start. But Schmidt seems, maybe he's the guy who will. I don't think that King is. Well, I mean, when you look at their game logs, it's kind of hard to distinguish, but I would just guess, given that Schmidt was the guy that they called for that 3 innings after Cole, that Schmidt is the 6th starter and King is the rover.
Well, I'm intrigued by Schmidt. I'm trying to find places where I could use him. I guess if I have to choose between Clark Schmidt at a min bid versus someone like an Art Warren who I've got on my roster right now, at least in that case, Schmidt makes sense as sort of a contingency bid if I miss out on the higher volume arms that I'm more interested in right now. But I'm going to venture a guess this will not be the last time we talk about trying to find some pitching and being ahead of everybody in that regard, because it's been an uphill battle early, and it's an uphill battle, it seems like, each and every year as we try to do this. I want to talk about this new early sample hitting metric. You received an email. So I don't know if this is just a reader of you named Dorsey, or if Dorsey also listens to the show, but the metric is pretty interesting. It takes hard hit percentage and barrel percentage and takes away called strikes and whiffs. And it's similar to something you had thrown out there. I think it was on Monday's episode of Rates and Barrels. The shows are blurring together for me if you haven't been able to tell. But nevertheless, curious what you think about combining those metrics and using it in the way that Dorsey's using it.
No, I like it. I like it. And what I had suggested was just that my list of early sample metrics that I like, the stats that I look at early in the season, included barrel rate and then hard hit rate, only because we haven't gotten to the 50 ball sample that you really want for barrel rate. So, hard hit rate tells you at least who's hitting the ball hard. And then I'd like to look at things like O swing and swinging strike, and O swing or chase rate. I'll do it eventually. I'll call it chase rate. Nobody needs to call it reach rate, I guess. And chase rate and swinging strike rate give me a sense of if they're changing their approach at the plate. Now, what I like about this approach from reader, what was his name?
Dorsey.
Dorsey, yeah, from Dorsey, is that it combines the idea of reach rate and swing strike rate in that CSW stat. So I like that sort of combination in one stat. Makes it easier for somebody to maybe do the work themselves, without having so many columns. What I like a little better about using reach chase rate and swing strike rate is that you're more directly looking at per pitch metrics, and you're giving yourself a bigger sample. CSW, called strikes and whiffs, is a per plate appearance metric. So, there's gives and takes, but hard to argue with some of the leaderboards he gave us, some of the looks at the leaderboards he gave us.
Yeah, so this was back tested also for last April versus the rest of the season, just to kind of get a feel for how effective it was. And I think the summary was 28 of 36 bats who finished the season qualified after starting in the top 50 either stayed within one standard deviation of their initial OPS or positively regressed. It's pretty good.
Yeah,
so
good way to spot a good bat.
So we've got two separate lists that were sent in. And so far in 2022, some of the top players whose top 50 ranks don't match their current OPS, which suggests positive regression, includes Jose Abreu, Christian Yelich, Dalton Varsho, Aaron Judge, Christian Walker, who you mentioned before we started recording is showing up on all sorts of leaderboards right now. And he'd be one of those players.
On Monday. He's like definitely, every time you do a little query, it's like, oh, Christian Walker.
Yeah, there's some shallow leagues where he might still be available, and there's plenty of leagues where you can trade where I don't think it would take all that much to get him from a team that has him. Joey Gallo, Joe Adell, Brian Hayes, Luis Robert, and Kyle Tucker. So a good mix of players in there. I think some of the younger guys, especially, are the names that are probably the most interesting to me. And Joe Adell, we know the early strikeout issues, especially in that series against the Astros, really started to shape some of the perception of him at the beginning of the season. And I think after what you could call a disastrous start, it still looks pretty rough on paper. 20 Ks in 44 plate appearances. He is starting to push things back in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, he did have his 3 strikeout game on the 18th, so it's not like it's totally changed. But going from like 3-2-2 in that opening series where he had like 7 strikeouts in 3 games, that'll in a small sample that'll change everything, right? Then he went back to sort of 1 strikeout a game before a little bit of problem against Houston, but it's Houston again,
This
right?
is
So like,
Houston. Yeah, he's faced Houston
maybe
6
they have a
times.
good game plan against him. I would expect him to strike out less, but it also is an important decision you have to make when you're looking at this sort of stuff. If you want to look at barrels per ball in play, where Adele looks amazing, or barrels per plate appearance, where he doesn't look quite as amazing because he's striking out basically half the time. I in a smaller sample, I could see looking at balls in play because you're saying, hey, this 45% strikeout rate is not going to hold. And then he's going to make more out of what his balls in play as he goes forward, and he'll have more balls in play. But I like the quality of contact a lot. And maybe he has a 33% strikeout rate this year, but still manages to hit 230. And if they give him full playing time, I'm saying like more like a 25 homer bat. So if you can handle the bad batting average, I think Joe Adell is a guy to roster. Kyle Tucker, I mentioned is absolutely somebody I would buy low on if it's possible, and somebody I would not worry about at all if you're rostering him. So I like that list. The other side of the list, I think, is it's a little bit more problematic because when you have a long track record of success, then I don't want to drop somebody just because they're on the wrong side of this list. So I'll just give the list, and then I'm gonna bring out some names that I'm not so worried about, despite their being on this list. These are like the bottom of the list, the guys who are not good at barrels and called strikes and all those. Carlson, second worst, Dylan Carlson. Jose Altuve, Mookie Betts, Starling Marte, Joey Votto, Kevin Kwan, Marcus Semien, Miles Straw, Randy Arozarena, Kyle Bryant?
Chris Bryant. I think it's
Derek
also Stephen
Kelenic.
Kwan too.
Did I say Kevin Kwan? Nice. I'm on fire today. Bobby Witt Jr. So I'm going to pull out some names I'm not as worried about. Mookie Betts, I'm just not as worried about because of the long track record. Joey Votto, same deal. Like, yes, he's reaching a lot right now. Do you think that Joey Votto can't just turn on the switch and be like, yeah, I know what the strike zone is. All right. I'm not going to reach so much. Right? Like, he has years and years of not swinging at balls outside the zone. And now he's going to, I did say reach a bunch of times. I think guys like Miles Straw and Stephen Kwan don't bother me as much that they're on this because I'm not rostering them for power. And they kind of have like in Kwan's case, elite bat to ball, right? So I just feel like, yes, they're not going to pop on any like great hitter list, but they do have value in fantasy. You know what I mean? Like like this, for example, this metric does not consider stolen bases, right? So like Marte and Straw and even Arezarena, it's like, I'm going to hold these guys because they're going to steal some bases. Maybe they're only going to hit 240 with 25 homers this year, but or in Marte's case, 15 or something, but they're still going to steal bases. So I'm going to hold these guys. But there are some names that do worry me on this list. And I think I have those in common with you.
I think it'll be interesting to see just where we go, 10 days, 2 weeks from now, because that'll be a full month. Some of these guys will probably play their way off of the top end or the bottom end of the list. I wonder with these younger guys, with Jared Kelenic and Bobby Witt Jr. and Dylan Carlson, how quickly are people going to make a decision to drop them in more shallow formats? I don't think you're going to see people in 15 team leagues cut them at any point because of what it took on draft day to get them, which eventually becomes more of a sunk cost fallacy. I'm not saying you should cut them now. If this goes on, if they were to get demoted to AAA, if any of those guys were to go to AAA, I think they'd be cuttable in some redraft mixed leagues as a result.
I think that Bobby Witt's kind of interesting in the NFPC idea, right? So you do pay like a 5th round pick. He's got power and speed. He's playing. I would actually treat him like O'Neal Cruz right now, where he'd be on my bench, near cutting if I really had to, but a guy I would like to keep as long as possible because there could be a breakout on the other side. At least he's playing in the major leagues, and there is so much upside. So, but I wouldn't want to be playing a guy that shows up on this list and is young like that.
Right. Well, I just think it's given what we saw with a lot of young hitters last year. I don't think we should be surprised that the first 10 or 20 or 30 games, even from Bobby Witt Jr., are an adjustment phase. And I just think it's a question of how patient are the Royals going to be, and
How
did they
patient should
see
we be?
how patient should we be, and did they see enough last year at AAA in half a season to say he's not going back down there? He figured out AAA. He can't
He needs to
he
figure
can't
this out.
figure out his problems against big league pitching going down. This is my adamant, like, at a certain point, the best thing you can do for a player's development is just let him stay. And the results overall might look bad all year, but you might see some of that improvement, like we saw from Kelenic in September last year, right? So the plate discipline get a little bit better as he was up. I think September ended up being his best overall month. I don't want to look at 11 games this year from Kelenic and 10 games from Witt and say, oh, okay, yeah, if you liked him, you were wrong, because you're not. Like, it's just, it could still be an early slump. That's anybody we're talking about at this point.
I'm more disappointed in Kelenic and Carlson, and that sounds like a parent or something. I don't
But
mean it that way. I just mean like
you thought because they'd seen it before. Like,
right.
this shouldn't, especially Carlson. Carlson's had a little more experience even than Kelenic, but both of them. But compared to
I'm
Witt,
revising my projections down for both. And we already have like a bet on Kelenic, which I'm starting to think I might win.
What was our bet on Kelenic?
It's like something like career OBP. Some like doddering old men.
Oh man, we
like,
really got to.
I told you.
What'd you say? Like a 330 career
Like
OBP
career
or something?
Yeah.
I took the over.
Yeah.
Yeah, time is still on my side here. So
but I'm revising Dylan Carlson's power expectation down. Absolutely. I think you should. I think you have to this is about moving fast. Like, you have to move faster than people. My expectation for Dylan Carlson's home runs this year is more like 18 now. I'd hoped before the season, before I saw some of these numbers, that maybe he could take the progression to 25, 27, you know?
mm-hmm.
Now I think we'd be lucky if he hit 20.
Frustrating to say the least, but definitely an interesting metric. Good way to look at players, and I like the success rate that was outlined last year. So I'm curious to see if it holds up again here in 2022. So thanks a lot for sending in that email, Dorsey. Let's go to a follow-up question about situational max velocity for pitchers. We were talking about Jacob deGrom and maybe a need for him to change his approach in order to stay healthy, in order to be the best, most durable version of Jacob deGrom, that maybe sitting not as close to his max velocity would be a good thing. And apparently there was a graphic on screen during an Angels game when Shohei Ohtani made his most recent start that broke down his average fastball velocity by situation. Nobody on, runner on first, runner in scoring position. And there were noticeable ticks up in velocity as the situation became more dire for Ohtani. So I'm really curious if you think that this might be sort of the happy medium between sitting at your max all the time and kind of reaching back and using the extra velo when you should. Like, that kind of seems like the appropriate risk reward balance to me. And I wonder if this is something you've noticed looking at situational velocities with other pitchers in the past.
I mean, I think the name that comes to mind is Justin Verlander. You know, he was a guy that could sit 94, and then all of a sudden in the last inning, you'd see 99, right? Another name that that occurred to me, and so I just hurriedly opened his Brooks Baseball page, is Carlos Rodon. And the reason why it occurred to me was that in the past, he's been a guy who was more like Verlander, where you would see a certain velo, and then sometimes in the sixth, you would see the 99 to get an important out. And I've even talked to him where he's like, yeah, I like to keep, I like to keep a couple ticks in my bag, for the end of the game. Is Carlos Rodon not doing that anymore? I'm looking at his max speed, his max velo right now, and his max velo right now this season is 99.4 according to Brooks. Last season, it was higher than that most of the time. He had a bunch of hundreds. He had 3 months with the hundreds, basically 4 months with the hundreds once you round. So that's true, but his average this year is higher than it was in every month last year except for one. So is Carlos Rodon treating this year like a contract year? And does that have ramifications for his injuries? Like, we're all excited and he looks healthy and he looks amazing, but is he maybe not doing the very best thing right now?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if there's going to be a definitive answer to this question, but
Yeah.
I just find it to be a more appropriate use of your ability. You shouldn't throw 90 max effort pitches in a game based on what we know about your max velo and how dangerous it is to sit there. But maybe throwing 15 pitches at max effort is okay because you're not overdoing it. You're not burning too far into the red on the meter, I guess, if you kind of thought of it that way, where you're just exhausting yourself every time out there. Like that does seem very problematic. So something I think we can hopefully dig into a bit more in the future.
Did you notice that Tyler McGill's velocity was down?
I did not. Is it so? Is the working theory that he was pushing too close to his max those first couple times out, and then created some fatigue that maybe reduced the velo the third time out?
Well, here's his average velo. In his first start, 95.9. In his second start, 97.5. And then against the Giants on Tuesday, it was 94.97. So basically 95. Last year, he was 94.95. So it was a little surprising to see him come out of the gate. Now I want us to look at his max. Well, his max changed. His max was 99 in those two starts, but his max last time out was 97. It's not as easy to read this chart, says the doctor. Because when he was pitching, when his max was 99, his average was 97, so he's 2 miles off of it. And his last one, his max was 95, his average was 96.7. So, yeah, I think he's trying to pitch closer to his max a little bit. I mean, he's just trying to give it full effort. But it is interesting that his maximum velo dropped almost 3 ticks from one start to the next.
How much could weather have played a role in something like that?
It did look a little cold.
Yeah. But still, that's a pretty big drop even with a weather change. But just one of the things that I know is on our minds a lot more now than it probably was even just 10 years ago. I've got one more question to get to. It's an exercise in pickup decisions. Tom wanted to know if we were looking at Jeremy Pena versus Anthony Santander as options on the wire, what would we be thinking about? What would our process be in making decisions between those two players, kind of broadening it out to just really any two hitters as we make these adjustments to our rosters?
I like I've said, strikeout rate, swinging strike rate. I look at the projections. I look at the barrel rate. I will look at the max EV. I look at the reach rate. It is interesting because Pena does not showing great reach rate numbers, but he is barreling the ball well, has hit the ball really hard, and has the power to show for it. But you know, I like that he's projected for 7 to 10 steals, but he hasn't taken off yet. And then when I look over at Santander, he's showing like the best plate discipline of his career, but he's not barreling the ball, and he's not projected for any steals. So I think given those two, I'd rather roster the guys projected for steals, even if his reach rate is a little aggressive right now. Chase rate, chase
Mhm.
rate.
We're trying to get there. I think the thing I'm looking at when I'm looking at two players that are just, available in a 10 or a 12 team league like this, I'm looking at playing time. I'm looking at who's actually getting more plate appearances. This is one of those cases where they both play every day, but because the Astros are better and turn their lineup over more often, you get more playing time from Pena, even if Santander hits higher in the order most days. So that's a factor for me as well. And I think the other
Pena
other
is hitting lower in the lineup, isn't he?
Yeah, for now. I mean, I don't know. Altuve's on the IL, we mentioned earlier, so
He
maybe he can
could
move around.
slide into yeah, he could slide into the top. I mean, he's showing good OBP right now, although he doesn't have the walk rate in the minors to support it, at least not the high minors.
But I mean, just look at the counting stats differences. 11 games for Jamie Pena so far. He's already scored 7 runs, driven in 4. You look at Santander,
Woo!
2 runs scored, 1 RBI. Like it, and
That
it's.
lineup is not doing well right now.
I mean, it's basic baseball card stats, but those are the stats we use and we care about, and it kind of highlights just the obvious difference in quality between the two lineups. Like, would you
Yeah.
rather hit fifth for the Orioles or bottom third of the lineup for the Astros? I think that's a pretty easy question to answer, especially now that Camden Yards isn't the hitter friendly environment that we were accustomed to for the last 20 plus years.
Yeah. And I come back to those steals, man. I know he hasn't shown us one yet, but as he gets acclimated, and especially if he stays lower in the lineup, I think it's easier to steal some bases down there. If you're not stealing right in front of Yordan Alvarez, maybe you get the green light more often. So there's some positive aspects for him to staying lower in the lineup too.
I've wondered too for players that can run a little if they tend to wait until a certain point in their big league career after debuting before they start running because you don't want to make mistakes. You don't want to do something that's going to
You don't
cost
want to
you
piss
playing
off
time.
Dusty Baker, who loves his veterans.
Right. You feel like after 40 or 50 games, okay, yeah, I'm able to run now. Like I've stabilized my hold on the starting job at shortstop, and I'm in a situation where I want to take off. I'll start running, and maybe you get a guy who's projected for 10 steals that gets you 6 because for the first third of the season, he's not worried about stealing bases. He's just worried about not making mistakes. I think
Mike
there
Trout,
could be
Mike
something to that.
Mike Trout stole 4 bases in his rookie season with 135 plate appearances. Now it was near the end of the season. He might have been tired, but he was a top prospect, and he was supposed to have speed, and he did not take off a lot until he in the next season was given the job and just sort of ran with it.
Yeah, I wonder.
Literally.
I don't remember writing anything specifically about Trout after that 2011 season, but I bet you could find stuff out there that's like might pop 20 homers and steal a dozen bases if he can hold playing time, and going to come with a disappointing batting average if
That's
he doesn't bring his K rate down, or things like that. We're probably what
Listen,
we're
that's
saying back
that.
then.
I think that's also part of the discussion in Pena versus Santander, right? Like age and potential for breakout has to be considered, right?
Hmm.
Like if their projections are going to be wrong, Pena's could be wrong in like the wrong direction. Like breakout chance is higher for Pena than it is for Santander.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I mean, with Santander, we've got almost 1,200 career plate appearances, and he's been just a tick below at league average hitter for that. It's a lot to say. Okay, he's fine,
Mhm.
and as long as the playing time's there, he's still pretty useful. But Pena can exceed those projections because there's an age to level component, a development component of where he's at that he could just take a big leap and suddenly he's 15% better than a league average hitter, even though projections think he's probably not quite that
Yeah,
good yet.
I mean, look how good he's been in his first week in the big leagues. Like his first 2 weeks in the big leagues. Like, imagine if he hasn't been super comfortable.
Well, yeah, in the face of a more highly regarded player, Bobby Witt Jr., struggling during that same time, and there's a big age difference here. I wonder how much that softens things. Being a 24-year-old rookie versus being a 20 or 21-year-old rookie, how much of a difference does that make for a player?
Yeah, it's true.
But thanks a lot for that question, Tom. Hopefully that sheds a little bit of light onto the types of things we're looking for as we make a decision like that. And hopefully that's applicable to other waiver decisions as the weekend approaches. Before we go, I will let everyone know you can get a subscription to The Athletic for $1 a month for the first 6 months at theathletic.com/rates and barrels. If you don't have that subscription, this is a good time to get in and do that. On Twitter, you can find Eno at Eno Saris. You can find me at Derek Van Riper. As always, you can drop us an email, ratesandbarrels@theathletic, or drop us a comment under this video on YouTube. Be sure to smash that like button if you're watching us there and subscribe to the channel. That's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We are back with you on Monday.
Yeah, if you're going to subscribe off of that Royals piece. It is the hot poop, as the kids say. And thanks for listening.